Pleasantville.
Nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and I am talking to you on a new microphone. Hopefully it sounds really good. I've sort of reached the end of my microphone grubbing, so hopefully this is the end of it and everyone likes what they hear. So today's episode is going to be a whimsical journey into the land of black and white television. No, I'm not talking about WandaVision. Timely reference. I'm talking about the 1998 film Pleasantville, starring, William H. Macy, or Philliam H. Muffman, as I prefer. Joan Allen's in it. Tobey Maguire in one of his, adolescent into adulthood transition movies. Reese Witherspoon at the beginning of her career. Jeff Daniels is also there. It's a great cast. It really is. Gary Ross wrote and directed it. So, we're going to, and it's probably not thought of as a movie for psychology, but there is a lot in it, and there's a lot in it to unpack. Maybe not back in 1998, but definitely through 2021 lenses, we can definitely see the value in this particular film for teaching and learning about psychology from movies. And I think I have a really good guest host for you all in this episode because he is fantastic. So without further ado, my phrases, let's jump into it. Yeah. My guest host today is Dr. Will Ryan. Will is an assistant professor in the psychology department at the University of Toronto, where he teaches health psychology, social psychology of attitudes, positive psychology, and organizational behavior. In his research, Will studies how social constructs and interactions support and thwart health and wellness. This includes a focus on reducing negative attitudes toward and promoting flourishing among members of marginalized groups. Perfect guest for this discussion. Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Alex. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm super happy to have you on. Before we jump into discussing Pleasantville, of course, I asked this general question to all of my guests. So first, I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on film in general. And then, because we have a bit of a teaching bent on this show, if you use film in your teaching, or if you don't, what else would you use film for?
To be honest, so I'm not one of those cool professors who uses film as part of my courses. That said, I do think that this film would work really well as a basis for discussion, particularly in a course like social psychology or an attitudes course. And so now that we're talking about it, I do kind of want to work that in a future assignment. But I think it could really work well for those courses because it's a film that is in some ways really tame in its content, but also really provocative. And so I think for teaching, it could work well for that. And so there's also a lot to talk about there because of that. And so it deals with these issues we're going to talk about today of identity, coming of age, authenticity, but also authoritarianism and oppression, and racial violence, things like that. And so the metaphors in this film aren't exactly subtle, but they do leave a lot of room to talk about, how we're going to interpret those. And so there's a lot for students to talk about that. There.
Right. And that to be able to take a film and just apply it to a bunch of stuff within a course, I think is the best of all worlds from somebody who uses films in most of his classes, myself. Like to have like we could keep going back to Pleasantville, like, you know, you do a couple of weeks and you talk about these things and you're like, oh yeah, remember Pleasantville? Like that. Like, that's really cool. That is really cool. And so I'm so glad you brought this film to the show. So what would you say brought Pleasantville more specifically to the discussion today?
I mean, so when I was thinking about what I could pick for this episode, I was trying to think about, you know, what I do teach and what I could talk about. And so certainly this has the themes that we mentioned, but also it's a film that still really relates to so much that is going on and is relevant still today, even though it was filmed 23 years later.
23 years.
I mean, or 23 years ago. Yeah.
Right.
And so I think, especially when I teach attitude, students often say, well, you know, so much has changed since this paper came out in 1998. It's so old. But so many of these main big questions are still relevant. Certainly a lot has changed, and thank goodness it has. But so many of the things that society is grappling with has absolutely not. And there's some really poignant quotes in the movie that, you know, make that really clear.
Right. From looking at a perspective of 1998 to the 1950s or whenever the time period is set. I'm not entirely sure. Late 50s, something like that. Mm-hmm. To 1998, right? As Gary Ross wrote it, you know, and then now fast forwarding again 23 more years, it's like, oh man, we're still talking about the same stuff. This is rough. So, you know, since you have mentioned that there is a ton of stuff to talk about in this movie, let's just jump right into it. And I think one of the major themes of the movie that smacks you right over the head with its, as you said, not so subtle allegory metaphor is the psychological concept of a self-identity. So you want to explain what self-identity is and maybe some examples from the film, Will?
Yeah, so certainly there's a lot of different ways that this is defined in the research, but often when we talk about self-dash, by that I mean, you know, concepts where there's a self in front, you know, self-esteem, this, and so self-identity is really these different aspects of the self, different roles people might have, different ways they might express themselves around others, and so it's there's many different parts of the self that are these identities, and so those. So I guess I should say. To say that better, the identities are the different, you know, aspects of the self that you are expressing in the world, and the different roles that you take on, and the different relationships that you might have. Yeah.
So, what identities do we see in the movie, and what maybe shifts for those characters?
Yeah. So I mean, they really talk about a bunch of different identities. I mean, there's the main arc of really just coming of age and finding your identity and place in the world. There's also sexual identity and sexual liberation and those aspects there. And so really, I would say those are the two main ones that I think that they work with. Yeah.
And the movie main characters, David / Bud, played by Tobey Maguire, and then Jennifer / Mary Sue, played by Reese Witherspoon, are high school students. I feel like Mary Sue is older than Bud /
I thought they were twins.
They were twins. Oh yeah,
there's an
that's right.
Opening scene where I love her line where we're only related on my parents' side.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I did. Yeah. I do remember that. You're right. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to tell what grade they're in high school, but it's definitely clear that they are in high school, and David and Jennifer in, you know, I guess concurrent 1998 high school. And then in the 1950s, as Bud and Mary Sue, they're also seemingly the same age and in the same grade in high school. So they're having to deal with all of the high school BS, as I like to call it, because that's what it was for me.
Oh, yes. Same.
So I mean, like, imagine having to deal with all of that, but also in a weird sitcom 1950s tragic land where everything is tragic until
Right, but then
things
that's
start
one
to
of
become
the
colors.
That's one of the interesting things, though, right? So both
Sure,
of them
yeah.
sort of find themselves in that world, and so although it's really a repressive world in many ways, it takes them, going back in time to this place to really break out of the roles that they've had in high school. As she says to him at the end, like, I tried slutty and that got old, but it's really hard once you're pegged as a role in high school to break out of that. And same for him with his role as a nerd. He's trying to, ask out this popular girl, and that's just not going to happen for him there, but he's able to find that confidence and that, what he's looking for in those relationships in Pleasantville.
Right. And he becomes the hero of the story, essentially. He starts out as a weakling, classic Arthurian character. Starts out as a weakling and then becomes, victorious at the end. So I think his arc is really good. I don't know so much about Jennifer's arc, the whole slutty stereotype, and then like, oh, all she needs to do is read a book. Like, it was a bit pigeonholey for sure. And then she becomes an academic, or academically engaged. And you get a little glimpse that she lives her life and ends up having at least one kid inside the TV show, which I don't know how that makes sense, but okay. But I do like both their stories. I think my favorite arc, though, my favorite self-identity is Jeff Daniels' character, and his name escapes me right now.
Is he Mr. Johnson,
the diner owner?
Yes. He's my favorite too.
Yeah, his arc is phenomenal because not only is it learning to do things himself, but like even bigger than that, he gets to do what he wants to do. He gets to paint and be with people that he enjoys. And it's such a magical character development, and sort of self-reflective for me was the getting to do the things that you like to do, which is like the whole reason why I do this podcast every few weeks with some of my most favorite people. Like, it's fun, it's good. Like, I get to break out of academia, not so much. I still have a toe in, but not like be like, oh, you got to read all of these papers and then write all this stuff. Like, no, I just want to do something fun sometimes. So that really resonated. Thank you.
What's wrong? I'll never be able to do that.
Well, you just started. I mean, you can't do it now.
No, that's not it. Just where am I going to see colors like that? Must be awful lucky to see colors like that. I'll bet they don't know how lucky they are.
So, pivoting now from self-identity, because a lot of the self-identity stuff that does happen in the movie is couched within the setting. And the setting is a repressive show, as you said, based on and in loving homage to shows like Leave It to Beaver, especially with Bud being named Bud. And then June Cleaver sort of being the archetype for Joan Allen's Betty character. So we have that homage, and then we have like other send-ups to things like the Andy Griffith Show, because Don Knotts plays the magical TV repairman who sends the kids into the TV show. So you have these really, what I guess we could call wholesome and traditional society where nothing bad happens, but not in the way that Hot Fuzz would. This is a deep cut for all my Hot Fuzz fans. Hot Fuzz would lead you to believe in that town where no crime happened, but they were just hiding it all the time. In Pleasantville, there's literally no crime.
Right. The worst thing that happens is that the cats are getting stuck in the trees.
Yes.
That's all that the fire department has to do. That is literally the worst crisis that they have, and they set that up pretty early there.
Yeah. They set that up like within minutes of them arriving into the TV show. And when there's an actual fire, they have no idea how to deal with it. It's great. It's great. And so because we can talk about the TV show as a 1990s reflection of the 1950s, there is a lot of stuff there about the 1950s and what sort of gender roles people had at the time. Sure, I'm assuming there are better examples in media for this particular piece of psychology, but I think it wrapped inside and there being a commentary on it makes it a nice addition to this narrative. And one of those things is the roles of the people. So what are some of the roles that these folks have in the TV show, Will?
I mean, I think the first and most salient one is the one of the mother, and that she is providing for her family and really serving her husband.
Bud, Mary Sue, your breakfast is getting cold.
It can't be possible.
Well, come on, kids. You're not going off to school without a hot breakfast inside you. Forward march. I just love you in that sweater, Mary Sue. It's so flattering.
Thanks.
Morning, kids. Better get a move on or you'll be late for school.
I don't believe this.
Neither do I.
Well, come on, dig in.
I put blueberries in them just the way you like. Well, come on, sweetie. It's getting late.
Actually, I'm not hungry.
Nonsense, young lady. You're going to start your day off with a nice big breakfast. Here we go. Sit down. Here's some pancakes, and eggs, sausage, and some good crisp bacon. And, of course, a ham steak. Now, you eat on up, then it's right off to school. Hurry, hurry.
That he frequently in that world just hollers for her, right? And then she comes. He doesn't get up to go get her. He just continues to yell for her to come and yelling, "Honey, I'm home." And so she really has this role of serving them and feeding them and caring for them. And in some ways, right, that's a really loving thing, and that's what really I think draws David Budd into this world when he's watching the show initially. Right, he's really getting some comfort and connection there. But that's one of the main roles there for her, and then the father as the provider, and so as her partner in that. So those are the really clear roles, I would say.
Right. And what does then David's arrival and then also Mary Sue's arrival do to those roles? because they're no longer their programmed Bud and Mary Sue. They are now these sentient kids with the baggage and memories that they've brought now.
Right, and so they definitely shake that up. And I think, if anything, Mary Sue or Jennifer the most in introducing her mother and others in the town to their sexuality and really shaking up that role. So that's one role that nobody has, right? In this, and that they make that very clear with the separate beds. And so although there are children, it's not clear how they appeared there. And so they that's not a role that's available to anyone. And she makes that that part of people's self available to them, including the mother, and that really shakes things up.
Yeah, and so now with the idea in the American 1950s of pure family values, what would we call that today? That would be subsumed within the patriarchy, right? Quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say so, yeah.
So what about the patriarchy then is threatened by Jennifer's sexual exploration and expansion to other. That's an odd pairing of words. Expansion of her sexuality to.
I mean,
the rest
she
of
literally blows up a tree with it, so I think that's a fair word. I mean, not blows up, but sets it on fire.
Sets it on fire, right?
Again, they're not subtle with the metaphors.
No, especially not that one, right? So what is the explosion of a sexuality mean for the town and the patriarchy?
Well, so it does a couple things, right? So it's not just about the sex itself, but there really seems to be a giving of this agency there, and that, and particularly because, at first when the mother learns about sex, she's sad and disappointed because she says, your father would never want to do something like that. And Mary Sue comes back with, well, you don't, there's ways to enjoy yourself, Mom, without Dad. And I think that's a big, important piece of her finding herself, is that she finds that she doesn't need him for her fulfillment. And it's the sexual, but also the other. And that's, I think, what empowers her to then ultimately leave. Because it's not that he's a bad person or a bad man or anything, but that's not the role that she wants, is as his sort of person serving him at his beck and call.
Yeah, I was just thinking server, right?
Server, yeah.
And I think the colorization has a lot to play in the advancing sexuality of the film, right? Because young women tend to become colorized first.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's actually kind of funny that the colorization doesn't occur for Jennifer first, even though she's the first person to have sex in the television reality. And that's because the colorization represents, going back to self-identity, represents the realization of someone's quote-unquote true identity. And she didn't get that identity until she read a book.
Yeah, that there has to be.
And fell asleep studying. Like, she literally did the thing that she was making fun of at the beginning of the movie. But
it took a sexy book to get her to do it. So they couldn't even give her that. Had to be D.H. Lawrence, which is a sexy book. I will say I stayed up late reading that too. But
the point is, she was reading.
Right. But you're right.
That's a really low bar. I feel bad now.
Yeah. No, but it is a good point that she doesn't turn color right away, and neither does Skip, right? He starts to see color right away. He sees that red rose, and things in the town start to turn. But I think that it's not just the sex. There has to be that emotionality behind it as well. And certainly he has his mind blown, but I don't think there's the soul or the authenticity piece in that for him.
Yeah, I agree with that, because of the women that we do see in the movie that are colorized before Some of the more main characters, we don't know too much about them, and so we don't know what it is they're exploring about themselves. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense that it has to be a deeper connection with something about themselves to turn them into color.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it speaks to one of the themes in the film of sexuality and women's sexuality as a liberation, and that was something
Right.
that was happening at the time that they're throwing us back to.
Mm-hmm.
That, it's not that men's sexuality can't be deep and soulful too, but it wasn't a rebellious thing at the time in the same way, a breaking out of the roles and norms. And so I think that's what makes it a bit different there in that. And certainly it turns some of the young men colors too, we assume, because we don't know what they're all turning colors up at Lover's Lane. But
Right. That's where all of the colorized people congregate and hang out by the lake or the pond or whatever it is, the body of water, and just canoodle. And it must have been something for them. It must have been the thing that they needed, and the menfolk of the town don't like it. And I think it's actually quite telling that far more women and girls become colorized before lots of the men do. Like, not even the teenage boys. A lot of them participate in the later sort of vandalization and mayhem and violence toward the colorized people. And these are just 17-year-old boys. So it's like, wow, there's a 17-year-old boy on trial for murder right now for an act very similar to what is depicted in this movie.
Right, and they definitely
it really
show
hits
how,
you.
Yeah, they definitely show how things can quickly escalate even in this perfect world. This threat of change and difference and people becoming colorized, radicalized,
Right,
is threatening that it quickly escalates, to violence.
Yeah, and I think that brings us a nice segue into our next piece, but we're going to grab that one right after this quick break. Hey, listener. Thanks for sticking around this episode. I hope you're enjoying it. Anyway, I need your help in growing this podcast's audience. In past episodes, I've asked you to share this podcast with 5 of your friends. Let's keep doing that. Share this podcast on social media, especially if you really liked an episode. Share that episode. Tell 5 of your friends or family if they have an interest in film or psychology, or even better, both. Growing the audience is our goal for the second year of programming, and so we need your help to get that done. Other ways to contribute to the podcast include tips to our PayPal, found on our website, becoming a patron at patreon.com/cinemapsychpod, rocking some sweet merch from our Spreadshirt shop, or leaving us a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Now back to the show. Okay, so as I said before the start of that break there, we were talking about how the patriarchy of Pleasantville was sort of reaching a boiling point, and it really the movie hits you over the head with authoritarianism. But Will, you wanted to add to the patriarchy bit before we jump into the aspects of the police state?
Yeah, I mean, I think this point fits well there too, but it's really just that we were saying that it takes longer for many of the men in Pleasantville to become colorized, but I think it's interesting, who it takes the longest for that to happen to, right? So we see Mr. Johnson turn color pretty early, and he's he's an artist, right? Art is usually not part of the mainstream. Art is counterculture, so he's pushing against that. And it seems to be particularly the men who are holding more power or who are benefiting from these norms and traditions that are not turning colors, not becoming colorized.
Right. And, you know, some of the younger boys who seem to be more in line with the counterculture, sort of the early beginnings of hippie culture, if this is the mid to late 50s. So like, you know, those early aspects of the against the man movement idea, right? So and that is particularly among individuals who did not think authority had the right to do whatever it wanted to do. Like there were limits, and there were supposed to be limits, and that the authoritarianism in Pleasantville is very staggering. And the mayor is basically a wannabe dictator. He strikes me as a guy who gets people's opinions, but already knows the opinions and sort of just wants to hear them back at him, if that makes any sense. Like, not super narcissistic, not like Donald Trump level narcissism, but just like a cunning, a really jerk cunning.
That's enough.
I thought I was allowed to defend myself.
You're not allowed to lie.
I'm not lying. You see those faces up there? They're no different than you are. They just happen to see something inside themselves.
I said that's enough. You're out of order.
Why am I out of order?
Because I'm not going to let you turn this courtroom into a circus.
Well, I don't think it's a circus, and I don't think they do either.
This behavior must stop at once.
But see, that's just the point. It can't stop at once because it's in you, and you can't stop something that's inside you.
It is not inside me.
Oh, sure it is.
No, it is not.
What do you want to do to me right now? Come on. Everyone is turning colors. Pretty soon, the women could be going off to work while the men stayed at home and cooked.
That is not going to happen.
But it could happen!
No, it could not!
I don't know. Will, does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, I think it's hard to reach Trump level narcissism. I think when they wrote this, I think honestly that's kind of what they were trying to write. That they did write him over the top. Some of his speech in the bowling alley is absurd in how over the top it is. And I think it feels less so now. And I think that's a sad statement on what we've become accustomed to. But I think that the goal in the writing of that was to make it seem so extreme that how could you agree with this?
Right. And
but now we just hear those lines. I mean, he literally says, "Hold on to the values that made this place great."
It was
rewatching it. I like spit out what I was drinking. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is
it's
too
like,
real."
Did Gary Ross predict the future, or do people now just watch Pleasantville for notes? Like it was very creepy how eerily prescient it was. Like, imagine us having done this like 2 months ago or 3 months ago, Will.
Okay.
Oh my God. And I think the interesting thing is, and I wrote this down in our notes, the interesting thing is when he full on becomes a dictator, that's when he becomes colorized. Like, that's when his identity was fully formed. He had wanted nothing to do with being colorized, and yet he was. And he was so upset about it too.
Yeah, I think it's also because that's when he really expresses like the real emotion behind what he's doing. Before that, he's pretending it's, for the good of everyone, that it's to keep things pleasant. But Bud David really forces him to admit that he's angry. That this makes him angry, that this is upsetting to him personally. And that's really
I think the personally part
turns it for him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good addition to that, because he he's also written to be a politician and does the whole politician thing until he no longer can hold in that it is personally just burning him up inside, right? And as you say, he just wanted everything to be the same. You mentioned that he doesn't turn colorized until Bud/David makes him angry. And because throughout the entire movie, he's saying things about, let's keep things pleasant. Let's keep things pleasant. Let's keep things pleasant. And it's just a way to shut people down, right?
Right. Definitely echoing modern calls for civility.
Yes.
I would say. Right, that's something that we say it's convenient and it shuts down voices. And that was especially poignant when they're in the courtroom and Bud asks where his lawyer is. And the mayor responds that they just want to keep things pleasant. And so pleasantry is, more important than justice. And so who is this pleasant for? But that's always used as his motive behind everything.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty telling that everything has to be sunshine and daisies in Pleasantville when life isn't sunshine and daisies, right?
Not at all. And,
if you want to bring Pleasantville to life, it's got to have some badness too.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I love about Mr. Johnson's character is his speech about that is after he does things by himself on his own for the first time. Then after that, he has this sort of existential crisis where he realizes that nothing ever gets better and it never gets any worse. And he misses both. And he says both. It's not that he just wants things to get better, but like nothing changes. And that's not, really what drives humans or what brings meaning and purpose in so many of the things that we look for in our well-being.
Yeah, and Jeff Daniels does a really good job of embodying and living that bit of dialogue in later scenes. Like he's upset that they smashed the window of the shop, but he's like, nah, it's okay, I'll clean it up. He's living that piece of dialogue, and I think that's some really great acting, and also some really fantastic screenwriting, because it pulls that bit of detail back, right?
Yeah, I think his character really gives the narrative for how repressive Pleasantville is, right? Even though it seems like he should be happy, right? He runs the fun hamburger joint, this and that. But the fact that they're stuck in these roles, even if it's an ostensibly a good role, that's restrictive. And so he sort of narrates what that does to him, that he's waiting all year for this one moment. And
that's
just
rough.
How sad that is.
Yeah. Just hearing that, this is the one day that keeps me going. It's just like, oh my God, man. Just to do that art. And you get to see his art evolve too throughout the movie. Like the first time you see him painting, it's on just like a piece of I guess poster board or canvas or something like that, and then you see the big old thing on the window, and it's great. And then he transitions to his own Titanic style painting. It's kind of funny because Titanic came out in 1997 and this came out in 1998, so I think that's pretty interesting. But you don't it's not the same level as Titanic, but it is a piece of pornography, and the town does not like that. They are not fans of that. So that brings us to our last major piece for this film, a major theme in psychological constructs for this film, and it has a lot to do with a recent episode of the podcast as well. The X-Men series, the X-Men franchise, won this has a great allegory in it, and metaphorical experience of racial and LGBT issues of the show's time period, and then even the time period in the very beginning of the movie and the very end of the movie in the 1990s. So, Will, do you want to take us through that allegory or those allegories?
Yeah, well, so I think first you can't help but mention that the movie explores these things without having any visibly queer characters and no people of color.
Right.
And yet it's touching on these themes. And so that's a really interesting thing to try to do. I think I don't think you could get away with that now with an all-white cast like that, but it certainly was an interesting choice at the time.
Right. I think it was a choice that may not have gotten too many raised eyebrows, to be honest with you. Late 90s Hollywood definitely didn't care.
So it's good to know that some things can change and do change. We're talking about things that don't. So that is something that, has changes. We do, recognize these things a bit more, and people at least are a little more outraged when there's not representation. So that's something we'll take it. But yeah, so it does that. It does this without that. And so it does this through the use of this color metaphor that we're never quite sure exactly what it's a metaphor for. And so I think it's just a metaphor for many things and different things at different points. We've talked about it in relation to sexuality, but then it's also clearly a metaphor for race and segregation. And they again are not subtle about that with the signs they put up saying no coloreds allowed.
Right. And, you could have probably found that sign in a museum and repurposed it for this movie because of just how stark it was from a historical point of view. Like it stares you in the face, no coloreds allowed. And so very, very provocative on Gary Ross's part, because like you said, no visibly queer characters in the movie. All relationships are expressed as straight as possible, and although I believe there is a mention of some maybe kissing between two girls or two women or something like that.
Oh, I missed that.
I think there is a very quick mention, but I could be wrong about that. It kind of struck me, so I wish I had written it down when that struck me. I was like, that's an odd phrasing. But then the thing that just blows my mind on the use of coloreds is that there are no people of color in and especially no African Americans in the movie at all. Like not one scene, not even in the 1990s.
No, they don't even have any when they show the high school.
Right.
There's not like.
It's mind blowing. It's that they got away with that, but I mean that makes the movie quite a bit more provocative, specifically on this allegory.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to think about. I mean, so certainly that's problematic, but given that that's the film, I think it's interesting to think about what that choice says. Right, that Pleasantville. That's not pleasant. That wouldn't be represented in Pleasantville, even though a town like that at the time that this would have been, modeled after.
Right.
What would have led to the beautiful grounds outside of the courthouse would have been people of color's labor doing the kind of work to keep the town idyllic. But Pleasantville, that's not visible at all. That's not there. And so I think it's interesting to think about how if this was made today, how those roles would be worked into the movie and what additional commentary could be had by that. Like what would this coming of color look like for people of color in Pleasantville, and what kind of agency would they gain, and what could the world look like after that if they were there as well from the start?
Yeah, that's I think much like 12 Angry Men was remade in the 1990s to reflect a different criminal justice system that isn't reflected well in the 1957 version. I think Pleasantville could and should be remade. I mean, as somebody who doesn't like a lot of remakes because they mess stuff up, I think it would be worth a shot to do exactly what you just said. To
I think
incorporate some of these newer themes and or newer experiences, and or in 5 or 10 years, whatever those experiences are or will be, right? So you had written a note. I want to go ahead and leave this last bit. You had written a note of coming out, and I would like you to explain this coming out note here.
Oh yeah, so I think one of my favorite scenes, and I feel like I keep saying this, but honestly one of my favorite scenes, because my other favorite character after Mr. Johnson is Betty, and in part because of her relationship with him. But when she first changes color, right, she's really not ready to be out yet, and I think for me that's really a poignant thing as someone who struggled with identity things in their own life and coming out. That for her, she's not ready for that yet. She's really afraid of the reactions of others, and so David helps her cover that back up with her makeup. And so, as much as, often being in the closet is considered not a good thing, that's really a loving moment between the two of them where he really helps her feel safe, and she's just not ready yet.
Are you okay? You all right?
What am I going to do? I can't go out there this way. How can I go out there this way? Look at me.
It's okay. It's all right. Betty? Have you got any makeup?
In my handbag?
And then there's sort of the opposite scene that then occurs afterward with Mr. Johnson, where he takes that makeup back off and really wants to see the real her, tells her that she shouldn't cover that up. And that's really her coming out when she starts to feel safe with this new identity. It's really because of his support that she's ready to face that. And then after that, she's really empowered, and she's not going to put the makeup back on. George, the husband, tells her she's going to put makeup on and they're going to go to this meeting. And she says, I'm not doing that. And that's, I think, a really powerful moment there. And so I just like the whole sequence of it. I think it really speaks to a lot of the, the research that I do that has been about coming out, and about how, a lot of the early work on coming out was that, it's always a good thing to do. We should really be, being out is good. And I do think that it's good to be yourself and to be authentic, but there are places where that's safe and there's places where that's not safe. And it takes a lot of support to be safe and to be ready to face the things that aren't safe in the world. And so I think that really illustrates that nicely. And it's because of the support that both David gives her in supporting her and not being ready, and then Mr. Johnson in really loving her for who she is, that gives her that power to walk away from George and to stand up to that.
Right. So. I was going to add, to walk to just not fall back into a rhythm at the end of the narrative. Be like, no, I'm actually going to be, I'm moving on. Sorry.
And she does it so gracefully and kindly almost that she really says, no, this is what I'm doing. And she doesn't, tell him everything he's done wrong. She's just like, I'm not coming back. Like, this is over now.
Yeah. And I mean, he'll have to understand it, of course, but I did want to add, and it's such a beautiful sequence. It is my favorite sort of, interpersonal character, development in the film. But the thing that like hits me is, that he's doing this for a woman he doesn't know, within the context of the plot, but he is supporting her in the same way that he wants to support his own mother, and then does so at the end of the movie when she is dumped by her boyfriend, whoever she was seeing at the time, because they have a broken home. Their dad's not there, and so. And he won't take them for that weekend or whatever. So it was a really poignant juxtaposition for that, because he was like, I'm just going to help this woman who is going to be a proxy for my mother. And I thought that was very beautiful. And then adding the whole coming out part from Betty's perspective, I think just makes that whole thing super wonderful.
Yeah, and so then once again, it's, although she's not an LGBTQ story, it sort of is one at the same time.
Sure, yeah. And I didn't. I caught the glimpses of it, but I didn't feel it the same way as you just described it, because I haven't had that experience. So, but now that you've said it, I think that just makes it even more wonderful. It's great. And I think that's a wonderful place to end our discussion, because it's on a high note. We can end on a high note, right? One of the things that we didn't have time to discuss, but if you have any thoughts, lovely, faithful listeners, if you have any thoughts, tweet us at SinSciPod or find us on Facebook at fb.com/SinSciPod. I don't know exactly. Just find us on our socials. You can find them everywhere. But one of the things that we didn't get to talk about was the psychology of color. Obviously, there were reasons why certain things were colorized first before other things. And we don't really have any logic to that, but there are some interesting visual metaphors and Easter eggs and things like that, and I think it's great. And it's you just to put a cherry on that top. I love the blood that you wrote down, Will. Blood when Bud punches Whitey, and he gets the blood on his face, and it's great. It's just like, ooh, red. Something behind that, let us know. I want to thank Will Ryan for joining me to discuss Pleasantville. While saying goodbye, Will, is there anything you'd like to plug? I always like to give my guests something that they can add at the end here, because, it's fun sharing. Where can folks find out about your work?
Well, I don't have much to plug. I don't have a Twitter or anything, but I guess if you really want to know more about my work, you can see my website. It's willsryan.com. So www.willsryan.com. There's a lot of William Ryans in the world, so it's tough to make a domain.
I feel you, dude.
A domain.
I feel you.
So
right. Right.
I don't have a Twitter because I'm not sure I could be trusted with one. I'm not. It's not some moral stance about, not wanting to be on social media. It's only that I'm not sure I could handle it. So
yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. I don't know if I can handle it most of the time. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I will link you all to willsryan.com on the main show notes and things like that, so you can catch it there. It'll be available wherever you get your podcasts. You can check that out. And so that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.